So we can start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today's talk with our distinguished guests, Foundland Collective, takes place within the context of Dar al-Funun 2022 Summer Academy, which, in line with our current exhibition, Rerouting, draws upon critical artistic practices and processes to inquire and build further on local knowledge. Foundland Collective, facilitators at the Summer Academy, explores underrepresented political and historical narratives by working with archives via art, design, writing, educational formats, video making, and storytelling. Throughout their development, the duo has critically reflected upon what it means to produce politically engaged work from the position of non-Western artists working between Europe and the Middle East. They will discuss their practice and projects such as Real-Time History, The New World Episode 1, and Groundplan Drawings, among others. And for that, this is my great pleasure to welcome the Foundland Collective, وغالية, السراقبي, and Lورين, Alexander, who are joining us from Cairo and Amsterdam. They will share their approach to analyzing, navigating, and connecting important historical and contemporary archives as part of their design research practice. I will hand it over to وغالية and Lورين, who will deliver the talk, and I will join them afterward for a brief conversation. I would also like to invite our audience to send in their questions to وغالية and Lورين through Zoom's Q&A window, and we'll plug them in following their talk. Thank you, وغالية and Lورين, for joining us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yazan, for the introduction, and thank you, Dar al-Funun, for inviting us to give this lecture, for Rana, also Beiruti, for inviting us to be part of this program. We're very excited to be in Jordan, in Amman next week, I think. We'll be there on the 15th to join the Summer Academy, and also to meet the participants and to contribute to this amazing project. As Yazan introduced us, we are وغالية, السراقبي, and Lورين Alexander. We work together under the name of Foundland Collective since 2009. We met during our master studies at the Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam. As Foundland, I'm just trying to flip with the slides, just bear with me. Yes, so as Foundland, we initiate projects that explore or aim to explore underrepresented political and historical narratives by working with archives via art, design, writing, educational formats, video making, and storytelling. So we try to position ourselves in an area where we could create projects that reflect upon what it means to produce politically engaged work from our position as non-Western female artists working between Europe and the Middle East. In 2011, our attention turned to events related to the Arab Spring and the Arab Spring effects on the Arab region and the world. And at that time, we started collecting and creating our own archives, what we call it, in an attempt to document what was happening at that moment, because everything was happening very quickly. And to later start research and study the role that images plays in conflict times. This image you see, it's a project it's called Simba, the Last Prince of the Baath Country. It's a research project we created in 2012 as a kind of reflection on war propaganda in Syria. We worked on also many projects that required traveling and living in few Arab cities, including Cairo in 2013, where we witnessed the large scale migration of many Syrians to Egypt and also other neighboring countries, and also the emerge of a lot of Syrian neighborhoods in the big cities, but also the outskirts of the cities. Our interest in observing and monitoring this phenomenon and its subsequent expansion of significant of a significant migration to Europe and the West, which kind of was negatively until this moment negatively reported by the media. This push us to find kind of different historical examples to be able to understand migration in a kind of a wider historical perspectives. So today we are going to talk about, sorry, I'm too late with my slides. So today we are going to talk about 3 projects that involves archives, different archives that we worked with in the past, I think 5 to 7 years. And I think we are very excited to join the Summer Academy because it will be kind of a new exploration for us to understand new, or to work with the participants on new kind of archive, that what we call the kind of how to deal with archiving organic matter. The 3 projects we're going to address tonight are The New World, Episode 1, Real-Time History, and Groundplan Drawings. I will start with The New World, and Lauren will take over, and then later on we will both talk about the 3rd project. So, our experience in Cairo, witnessing this large-scale migration, and in particular, my personal or my own family moving from Damascus to Cairo at that time, make us look for other examples and in history, as I said, and this brought us to the historical neighborhood in New York City, was known as Little Syria. So in the late 1800s, thousands of immigrants from Greater Syria, today's Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, arrived in New York City, many of whom were escaping religious persecution and poverty under the Ottoman Empire. Most of them settled in Little Syria, or what they called back then the Syrian Quarter. It's an area around Washington Street. So it's from Battery Park to Rector Street because of its location. Like you see here, the red, the yellow spot on the map. So of course, because of its extreme important location, because it's close to what we know now as the World Trade Center, many of migrants actually ended up settling in this kind of neighborhood and starting their kind of like life in the United States. It was also like the neighborhood was also known for a lot of newcomers as the area where they can find jobs and they can settle for very cheap, because all the Syrians or all the residents from that from Greater Syria actually were hosting and those newcomers, and also like offering advice and guidance on how to actually find a new life. So most of the Syrian at that time, most of them began as peddlers, also known for their entrepreneurial spirits. Thus the neighborhood was full of Arab coffee houses, pastry shops, smoking barrels, dry goods merchants, and silk stores. But unfortunately, in the early 1940s, the demolition phase of the Syrian neighborhood began with the construction of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And this caused that many residents of this neighborhood needed to move from the area. And this marked the start of the disappearance of this rich and vibrant community. So with our visits to New York in 2014, because we had an artist residency there, we started to collect like many information about that neighborhood, and we met with many civic groups, individuals, and researchers who were interested in preserving what was left actually from this neighborhood, and trying to document the role of this forgotten community and its enriching kind of, or like contribution in enriching America's cultural heritage. And this is where we learned about this amazing archive. It's called the Faris and Yamna Naf Arab American Collection. It's at the American National Museum at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. And we thought being there, or like, it's a really great opportunity to investigate this archive. So we applied for an art residency and at the Smithsonian Institute, and we got the opportunity to work with this archive for 2 years in a row. So this distinguished archive is considered one of the most important projects that documents the history of the Arab American community. Was collected by Dr. Alexia Naf, who was a Lebanese-born American. She was a passionate collector and pioneer historian of Arab American culture and immigration history. So Naf documented Arab immigration to the United States during the late 19th and early 20th century. So you see her in this image there on the right down. So what she did is she basically traveled around, met all those families, and tried to collect as much as possible. And later on, she donated the collection to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. So the collection, and this is what we read back then on the website, contains more than 450 oral histories, 2,000 photographs, and 500 artifacts. To be honest, we had no clear idea about what we are going to find when we arrived there, because there were limited information about the collection. And this particular archive. And after receiving the residency, we thought it will be, we were actually surprised to when we went there to find with the amount of information we found actually about this forgotten community that nobody know about. So the archive was not organized in such way to facilitate its study, and it was not organized to access, the accessibility of it was not really easy to find accurate information. Many of the documents were classified in large boxes with family names. Much of it was also in Arabic, and most of the time we need to translate part of it. So in our first year, we worked on trying to have a total overview of what is in there, and make a proper plan, and come back next year with a specific plan of what we want to research more in depth. We focused primarily on the cultural repertoire that emerged from this neighborhood, such as Al-Funun, is what you see here on your left. It's a literary arts magazine founded by Nasib Arida in 1913. Al-Funun was one of the first pulps printed in Arabic in New York City. The magazine published mainly the work of the Pen League, Association, to which Khalil Gibran, Amin Rehani, Mikhail Naameh, and other well-known writers of the diaspora belonged, in addition also to translated international literary work. Another example, which you see here on the right, is the Kawkab America, which started as a weekly newspaper. It was the first Arabic language newspaper in North America, typeset by hand, and was distributed between 1892 to until 1908. We also we had in mind also, like, okay, what are we going to do with all this information that we finding in this archive? So we tried to focus on researching like a group of personalities that we find interesting, and that sparked our interests during our first visit. And our first choice as a story to work on was the story of Adla and Amir Khadaj. Adla and Amir were a couple, Lebanese musicians from Mount Lebanon. They worked during the 30s as singers at the Palestinian radio station in Jerusalem. They lived in Jerusalem until they immigrated to the United States in 1947, 1 year before the Palestinian Nakba. Through our search in their personal documents, concert flyers, posters, letters, and song lyrics, we were able to trace the trail of their life, and also how they were able to establish a career and a family in the United States. So we decided that their story would be the first to feature in our work, using their archival material and also other found material we recorded ourselves during our journey, trying to track back their story. So our experience in the archive, because that was actually the first time for us to work with institutional archive, with and to deal with this kind of material. So this experience kind of led us to realize the importance of reviving these forgotten stories and using them as a source to build alternative narratives of the migrants' history in particular. So we started sharing what we found through informal gatherings in which we hosted many friends and other people who were interested in the topic. Because also for us, it was in the beginning difficult to find out what exactly, what kind of format also we need to use to tell their story. We also went on many trips to track the first journey of Amir and Adla from Jerusalem to the United States, through visiting many cities such as Cairo and Alexandria. And all this kind of information we could find luckily in the archive itself. We also translated, so here is like, we translated lyrics of self-composed songs. So Adla and Amir, they used to sing Zajal, and as you know, Zajal has to do with a lot of improvisation. So they used to write and work with musicians to kind of like compose music for their lighting. So we worked on translating, and later on also we tried to find recordings, but it was kind of impossible to find. So we worked closely with these amazing men, Hamdo, Maher, and Murhaf, a group of Syrian musicians who recently also moved to Europe as asylum seekers, and who happened also to be familiar with Zajal music. And they helped us kind of understand the lyrics of Amir and Adla musically in a way, and also they composed and improvised music performance that we could record. So this collaboration with them also allowed us to be able to reactivate the archival material by reinterpreting and performing their music and recording it and new interpretation. Finally, the result of this research was a group of artworks. The first was an installation that includes a short video narrating Amir and Adla's life journey. Also with it comes a mural that kind of based on an imagined map that tell the story of their journey between the old and the new world. This is a screenshot of the movie that I'm going to show. We did exhibit this work in many places, several exhibitions, and it was interesting to see, like every time we presented in a new space or a new city, how actually the community reacts on it, and how they kind of read the story of Adla and Amir and interpret it in a kind of more in our times. So, right, I'm going to show a piece of the video.
مدينة الإسكندرية وعلى سفينة ساتونيا عبروا البحر والمحيط ب10 أيام لحتى وصلوا على أمريكا، شارع كلينتون ببروكلين. عامر وعدلا ما كان معهم مصاري كتير، بس كان لهم مشجعين كتار يلي كانوا مؤمنين بموسيقتهم وأغانيهم الحلوة. أمريكا كانت المكان الجديد يلي فيه ريحة البطن.
This is just a short clip from the. So as you see, what the video actually has 5 chapters, and each chapter talk about specific phase in Amir and Azla's life. Started with their them working in Palestine at the radio station, and then moving to the States, and their journey in the States. So what was for us also like kind of an interesting exercise is to see how to use archival material in this video. Like what we and then ended up using is a kind of a combination between the real archival material that we found in the footage that you see in the middle, like kind of the evidence of what their narrated story actually by Maher, actually one of the musicians that we collaborated with, and the found footage that we found online and also like in other archives that support and give context to the story of Amr and Adla, and then the background, which was a kind of rendered of us visiting all these cities that they that we were not able to visit in person, but how we now we tried to trace it via Google Earth, which was also like kind of interesting image, because Google Earth is also like kind of a combination between old and new images. So in a way, like we always try to investigate this kind of link between new and old images, and how together they kind of they're weaved in, and they become like kind of one thing. And then in between, we had the recording of Maher Murhaf singing and performing the songs of Adla and Amir in between the chapters. Another artwork was also developed from this material was the New World's Time Stacks. It's a series of glass and layered photographic collages, which bring physical form actually to the concept we created, and it narrates the story in a different way. In this work, we emphasize migration experience over time. So you had like each object has like 4 layers of glass and contains a mix of archival and contemporary images and documents. We were also invited to create a lecture performance for Tashwish. It's a feminist festival organized by Goethe Institute between Brussels and Cairo. And we kind of developed an audiovisual lecture performance focusing on female characters we kind of met in the archive, such as Alexina Naf herself, the one who established the archive. Afifa Karam, a feminist writer and journalist. She's the founder of The New World, العالم الجديد. It's the first feminist Arabic magazine founded in 1911. Was published in Arabic in the States as well. And also like Afifa Karam was known for writing for Al-Mar'a As-Suriya, also another magazine was established in the States in 1913. We also like featured in the performance other kind of amazing women, such as Little Egypt is well-known. It's well known as the first belly dancer to arrive in the States, and also other writers such as Noor Himdadi and other figures. So that's it about this project. There is a lot to tell, actually. It's quite 2 years, like long research, but maybe we can like talk about it during the question time. But now I'll give the floor to Lauren to talk about the second project. Lauren, ready? The audio.
Hi. Hey, I am ready. Thank you for changing the slide. Indeed, now we're going to transition to the next project, actually. And as Ralia mentioned, we are going to be mentioning 3 different projects that we've been working on the last couple of years. And each of them deal with different types of archives. So we are really excited today that we'll be joined, hopefully out in the audience, there are people, participants of the summer school that we'll be hosting next week. And as Ralia explained, with the New World, we were diving into an analog archive. of historical material. And real-time history, the next project we talk about, will be focusing on a digital and open source archive. So a completely different project that I'm going to speak about now. So real-time history was something that we started to work on way back in 2018, and we are still currently working on today. It's an investigation that uses artistic methods of subjective image-led analysis to juxtapose and interpret video material related to the Syrian conflict. And as you heard in some of our previous projects, we've been sort of watching the Syrian conflict, also because Radia is originally from Syria. I'm not sure if she mentioned that, but we were often working since 2011 on projects related to the conflict. And so for us in 2018, this project was an opportunity to dive into open source video material. And given the vast amount of open source material available, which is often narrated via YouTube very frequently, telling different stories from different geopolitical standpoints and through various news media sources, our aim with this project was to contribute to an in-depth and closer reading of video material, the use of which already plays an important role in evidence building. Now that we move into a post-conflict period in Syria, this becomes ever more important. So what you see on the slide currently relates to the first iteration of real-time history, when we focused on documenting conflicting narrations of video reporting from one very particular perspective, and that is through the story of a specific alleged chemical weapons attack that took place in Douma in Syria on the 7th of April, 2018. And here what you see broadcast in two different Western news media, such as you see, The Guardian and CNN, are the reports directly after this attack. And one of the things that we started to notice in the reporting was the repetitive use of very similar videos to tell this particular story. So what we see in this slide is an emergency UN Security Council meeting, which actually took place shortly after the attack, where Western countries led by France, the UK, and the USA condemned the attacks that we saw in the previous slide, which they deemed to be carried out by the Syrian regime and Russian forces. Just 5 days after the attack, as a result of public media outcry, the Western retaliation took place, defending the credibility of the prohibition of chemical weapons just hours before a fact-finding mission investigated on the ground in Syria. So these events took place, and what we have here is, well, an extract. We also use this as part of our publication, but it's an extract from the report that the fact-finding team released after their investigations. So the only watchdog organization which is sanctioned by the UN to investigate chemical weapons abuses globally is called OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It's based in The Hague in the Netherlands. And following their investigations on the ground in Douma in April 2018, the report actually released after that was that there were no traces of chemical weapons on the scene. So the case in Douma led us to consider which videos precisely had been used to draw the conclusions about these events, which had been widely publicized. Our search for verified video material made by citizen journalists led us to the Syrian Archives, which is a Syrian-led and initiated collective of human rights activists dedicated to collecting and also downloading visuals and videos related to human rights abuses in Syria. So that what you see on the screen are some shots of the vast amount of video material that we initially sourced when we were looking at which visuals and videos were connected to this particular event. So during the process, we created an extensive database to capture about 100 videos related to the first case. The database details how video material has been distributed, how it's been viewed, through which channels. And we also detail different ways that the story is told, through witness testimonies or by hospitals, workers. All these different channels of narration were part of our selection. The gathered video documentation was downloaded before we began to unpack as many connections as possible related to the particular events of April the 8th, 2018. Important aspects like translation and how to make this all visible on our during our process. And one of the ways was to create a kind of matrix or Excel schedule. So next slide, right? So real-time history, the resulting video that emerged after we had gathered all the research and material was presented as a video installation, which was first shown at Ars Electronica festival in Vienna in September 2018. The structure of the montage of this video takes the form of a conversation between the makers. That's myself, Lauren Alexander, so you see it as LA in the video, and Ralia Al-Srakbi, GE. And we independently analyze the video footage in a very explicit way as a kind of dialogue on the screen as you see the videos playing. Our discussion is shown as scrolling text next to the video. So it's a translation and an interpretation at the same time. So I think that the next slide is, okay, so yeah, I think the one after this is the video. In the editing of real-time history, we paid close attention to keeping the real-time playback speed of the original found YouTube clips. However, the framing and the fragmenting of the videos as artistic intervention in the material breaks down the images into isolated scenes, making it possible to look very closely at the details. Our main premise in real-time history is following one video case study. So that's what you see here on the screen, which consists of a short video fragment by the same maker and used in 3 different contexts to tell a different version of the story. So Yasser Al-Dumani, who you see here in where it says number 1, he wears a stripy shirt throughout all of the videos, and he is actually the citizen journalist who is filming this short fragment. So by following the video marked in red on the diagram, so earlier next. No? Okay, no, sorry. We're not synced. Okay, there we go. So here we go. This is a diagram. So the red marked at the top is basically the duration of the first original video that we used. And then you can see how that video is basically edited into the second one and then into the third one. So the same video material travels through actually 3 different videos, but in the very last one, it is actually used to tell an opposite story or an opposite truth that in comparison to the first one. So this is what we found really fascinating, and it was quite helpful to sketch that out in the form of a diagram, as you see here. But then, yeah, I wanted to show the short clip, but I believe it might be.
Wait.
We have the clip there.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, exactly. Not working? Okay.
It's not working. Wait a
Okay, no problem. It doesn't matter. Oh, there we go. No, that's very strange. I don't know why it's not working, but maybe it's nice just to stay on this slide. What you see here on the left is GE. So Ralia is actually starting the dialogue, saying the 2 eyewitnesses are now sitting watching a laptop with the video of the so that's our conversation that's basically recorded, and then our conversation scrolls on the left-hand side of the screen. While at the same time, we use the YouTube found footage on the right, focusing in on details and kind of, let's say, discussing what is going on at the same time as the video is unfolding. So in that way, we develop a way of analytically looking and framing the visual material that we're looking at the same time. Okay, so what's next? Okay, so the research and the observations about the 3 videos we collected in the form of the video, of course, which is 22 minutes. But when we showed this in the exhibition space, we also used a small booklet, which was quite an interesting way of contrasting methods of reading video, watching, or then looking at stills or extracts in the form of a storyboard. So yeah, those were both shown in the exhibition space. Then we continued actually to work on this project. And in fact, when we dived back into the project in 2020, we realized that the whole controversy around the video material related to the chemical weapons attack actually had not been solved, let's say, but the whole complexity of it increased. So we attempted to map out the various actors involved, including governments or human rights organizations, journalists, academics, etc. And then it immediately became visible also that most of these actors are actually outside of Syria, many of them based in Europe. And that's, of course, because many people have left the country and are in exile, but also because many human rights organizations working with open source material are based in Europe. So I think the next slide zooms in yeah, here you can see, it's quite small, but on the left-hand side, you see the eyewitness, Yasser al-Dumani. He is actually the central focus of this map, or actually the map stems from him. So he is representing, of course, many citizen journalists who have been producing and distributing material for multiple reasons in the absence of journalism, yeah, whose material now finds its way onto archives and storage vaults, which may or may not lead to a court of law eventually. So with this whole project, it wasn't really our goal to determine what really happened, which is often something people ask us, like, what really happened? Was there really a chemical weapon attack or not? It's not the intention really to determine what the truth is, but we were interested in the afterlife of all of the video material, how it's stored, what happens to it afterwards, and who has access and actually power to control that narrative going forward. So this is a project that we continue with. Hopefully next week we can tell you more about that. Rally, I think you wanted to maybe start with the next project now.
Yes, the Groundplan Drawings. So as you see, most of our projects are ongoing, or that's what we call ongoing, because they start in a way, and we continue working on it because they have also this component of collecting and growing, and sometimes they take different direction. And this is one of the projects actually that started by a conversation while we were in New York City in 2014, and we were working on our exhibition at ISCP in Brooklyn. And at that time, and I think it's really kind of interesting to mention that the way how me and Lauren work, it's quite interesting. Like, we always try to be involved or involve other people in what we are doing. And during that time, we were traveling a lot, trying to meet a lot of Syrians. Some part of them were friends or family members, but we also friend of friends, and our kind of like network grows through time. And it was very important for us to share with them what we're doing, and also to be able to this is also like part of what we're trying to do, is like give them give their stories kind of a place or a form we are more interested, because we think their stories are worth documenting and also telling. So we met a group of Syrian, and we were talking about the notion of home, especially at that time when a lot of Syrians were leaving the country. And we started this kind of small exercise by asking everybody to draw the ground plan of their of the house that they left behind, and what they exactly remember from that house, and how can they kind of reflect what home means for them through this drawing. And for our surprise, the results we got were so different, and on the same hand, sometimes also on the other hand, very detailed and interesting. Interesting to see how each person actually interpret this question in its own way, and it relates to its own experience. So as you see in this example, the one on the right from Iyad, and the one on the left from Iyad, and the one on the right from Ahmed. And Ahmed chose to draw his childhood house, and he also in a specific moment of time that related to his childhood, while Iyad was more focusing on how actually the house condition changed before, how it was before and after what happened in 2011. So also it became interesting for us to collect more of these drawings to understand how people understand or how they relate and how they use their memory when it comes to understanding the notion of what they call home. We collected around 30 different drawings. It took really long time to collect them, because also we didn't want to just create a simple exercise where people draw and send us things. We wanted to have a conversation, and we wanted to know exactly, or to know the story of the drawing. So the process was quite long. And later on, now you can see this project where we exhibited at Amman Design Week in 2019. The project took grows and took different formats. So we first started with the drawings, and we published this publication where you see the drawing, and on the left page you get all the information related to the person who drew it, where they were, where the location of the house, and where this person is located at the moment, and a translation of what was written on the map in English. Also, the publication consists of some photographs that of these houses that some of the participants in this project send us, and also some quotes while we kind of recording those gatherings, kind of quotes about how they experience living in the house during the conflict, or how they experiencing losing this house, or what happens to it in time or after they left. So these are few spreads from the publications. Yeah, later on we started to record those stories, because we thought there are so many interesting insights. And this video was recorded with Maher. Lauren, maybe you need to say more about this video from here.
Yeah, sure. So, well, Maher al-Shraki, he is an acquaintance of us. And he is also, or was at that time in 2017, a recent refugee to the Netherlands from Syria. And yeah, it was a great privilege to spend 3 days with him to speak about the story of his home. And of course, not without its traumatic and awful memories also that were spontaneously brought up during the conversations, but that he was also very happy to share. So for us, it also became a very important part of this project, that not only are you asking someone for a fleeting memory, but the practice of drawing, and to open up the home and the kind of the things that have happened in that space as a kind of stage for things that have taken place was also very important and cathartic also for them. So these are some drawings of the process of Maher's house, where he was recalling memories in relation to architecture. So we documented all the different parts of this process. And actually, these are some of the inspirations that we used during this period. So this is something called a memory palace. So Temple of Time is a drawing taken, it's by Emma Willard from 1846. And it's actually an educational diagram, but it explains the concept of the memory palace, which basically works on the premise that by mentally placing information within a familiar architectural form or structure, that it becomes way easier to recall that information. So in fact, the idea of memory palace has been used as like a memory recall tool or a trick to use. And this, was also quite inspirational in thinking about what kind of spontaneous memories are triggered by the home and the memorizing of architecture and architectural spaces. This is another source of inspiration for the project. We considered the role of the archaeologist who needs to use ancient ruin sites as incomplete pieces of evidence to create an impression of reality in ancient times. So ruins are obviously not there anymore, and often 3D reconstructions are a beneficial tool to reconstruct what was once present. So in a way, history as we know it is also built on a kind of fiction, or what we interpret history or historical architecture to have looked like. Also, 3D printing itself has also been used by governments and by artists who have a specific agenda in mind. And what you see here on the left is the Arc of Triumph in Palmyra, which was destroyed by ISIS in 2015. The reconstructed version is seen here, which was sponsored actually by UNESCO and the EU as a statement against ISIS terrorism. And then in contrast to that, let's say, is on the right-hand side, you see artist Nora Al-Badri, who made a 3D scan of Nefertiti's bust, which is kept currently at the Neues Museum in Berlin. And the data of this bust was made open source as a kind of anti-colonial activist statement, so that it could be recreated and taken back to, for example, where it came from in Cairo. So with Groundplan Drawings in mind, we wanted to experiment also with translating the drawings into 3D models. And for this, we worked with an architect in Cairo. And this was a challenging process because, of course, when you deal with subjective memories of people who have created their home drawings, then once that is translated into architectural form, of course, it doesn't properly match. So there's an element of subjective interpretation or kind of a mismatch going on when you make that translation. But it was an interesting process to experiment with. The yeah, so here what you see is basically us also speaking about the memory of events inside a home. So here's Raleigh and I, in our usual fashion, we always work pretty much in dialogue. And here we are actually talking about the events very personal to her that took place in the home that she grew up in, which also faced devastation and you know, violent acts related to the conflict which happened inside the home. So she is recalling a memory through conversation. Yeah, what you see here is a rendering of the home. And this is the home actually of my hair that you see here. So what we decided to do in this kind of architectural rendering was also to include the devastation that took place. So, well, that's probably in contrast also to what you normally, how you would normally see architectural drawings. Here, what you see is small holes in the wall, which is one of the stories that actually Maher emphasized, that they, when he was hiding with his family inside the home, again, an example of how the home becomes a shelter in times of war, that they would hide their valuables inside the small holes in the electricity sockets in the walls. So those were small details that we decided to actually include inside the 3D renderings, is to emphasize or bring to the front the personal aspect of the drawings. So we used 3D printing to rebuild some of the houses. This is what you see here as part of the exhibition. And one of the reconstructed drawings belongs to Omar and Marwa. For this model, we worked together with participants to also retell the audio. So we had an audio aspect as well related to the 3D print. Yeah, this was kind of an experiment for us to see how audio can work together with the models. We looked at the fragment of the 3D model. We looked at it from different perspectives to almost frame the story from in the scenes in different rooms, and we also translated it to English and to Arabic. Yeah, I mean, this was an important project for us as a way to experiment with storytelling, but also in terms of documentation and preservation of personal stories of war. Yeah, the whole process has been pretty valuable in terms of kind of a healing process also for the participants, for them to be able to talk about issues that, you know, would not necessarily come up for them. Sometimes they never spoke about these issues before, but through this had the opportunity to address those. Yeah, so, oh, we are at the end. Perhaps Ralia wants to add some sparkling closing words.
Well, yes, I think the main purpose of this presentation is also to try to kind of share our experience in working with different archives. Like at the beginning, we worked with the Smithsonian, with Alexei collection at the Smithsonian Institute, so kind of like more institutionalized archive that exists in an institution, where also regulation and also like the notes of different researchers who worked on this collection and try to find like our own interpretation of it, but also working with the specific guides and regulations of this archive about using the archival material. The second one is a kind of like a new form of archives, kind of new initiatives that are specialized in archiving those video material that come from conflict areas, such as the Syrian Archive. So it's completely different kind of practice, where the person who is in charge, or people who are in charge, have completely different roles, and also they read the material because the material is different. They have also like different skills, and in a way they are collecting real time and reflecting on the material real time, without also, it's kind of like a different kind of archive. And the third one is something that we initiated, and we still collecting, and in a way we are our interpretation of this collection also changed through time, and using it also in projects, and in also like reflecting on it through time, changes and go deeper. So yeah, it's a kind of like interesting to see how these three kind of archives differ, but also have something in common as well. Yeah, maybe we can discuss that, or I don't know if anyone has questions, or if Yazan wants to take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Ghalia. Thank you so much, Lauren, for this wonderful talk. I think we have about 30 minutes, so I would like to remind our audiences that they can send in their questions through Zoom's Q&A window. And maybe I can start with this general questions. I'm thinking that nowadays the word archive is sometimes used very loosely, and it could be used loosely to refer to like any loosely defined corpus of media documents. So within the context of your practice, how would you define an archive?
I can imagine. I understand what you mean, Yazan. That it's, I think also in terms of artistic practice, it's something which is very often mentioned. But I think for us, it's not really, let's say, it doesn't really matter how important or how prominent the archive is, but I think it's important to be very specific on how we make our selection of, like, let's say, the boundaries of which selection of material we want to focus on. So I think, well, we've spoken about 3 different archives now. So the Alexandr archive, the Syrian archive, the online archive, and also in the last example, actually, that was mainly a personally generated archive, actually, of a network of people that are also very sort of close to us, and acquaintances and friends, etc. So maybe we also use it rather loosely in that it's different types of materials and different collections that we're also tapping into. But I think that that's also okay, as long as the sort of the power relations also connected to those specific archives, that you also are able to make that quite clear, you know, like with the NAF archive in Washington, DC, it was also quite difficult for people to generally have access to that it also, there was a high threshold actually to go in there even. So that's why we also found it quite important to actually take the stories out of there. So every selection or every kind of different archive that we've used have had their own sort of parameters around that. And I think as long as we're really explicit about that in the context of the project, I don't think it really, it doesn't matter for us particularly how to describe it or how to quantify it.
I think we are also like kind of more focusing on how we interpret the material we find in the archive. And about narration, I think I read once that the meaning of word archive, the Latin meaning is like it's related to it's able you to govern in a way. So in a way, kind of archives are kind of a collection of documents and material and knowledge, actually, that allows you to project, understand history, but also understand the present, and also project to the future. So I think we are interested in that particular kind of exercise when it comes to the material we find, but we are also interested in our position to the material, and also in the work we create, how we make this visible, that this is our own interpretation. So what you see in real-time history, the way how we expose ourselves by showing the conversation. So you are actually literally, you see us talking, interpreting the material. That was for us kind of like very important kind of you know, like a decision to make in the art piece, that it's us talking, and it's our own personal interpretation and our own subjective interpretation as well for this material. So positioning ourselves toward the material is also like kind of what always we discuss and we try to find, especially when it comes to very sensitive material that you saw in real-time history, when everybody also like busy reading the material and in a forensic way, you know, like we kind of like do the opposite. We reject that position, because we as artists, we think we don't want to be in that position, you know, we don't want to go into what's happening. We want to question the image itself, the making, what actually we are seeing, without the further like implication of what happens or not. Like so what we're trying to do now with the continuation of the project is talking with different people from different practices who are dealing with those images. So how a lawyer or someone who's from the legal from his position as a legal entity, how they view this material, what kind of requirements and qualifications and regulation they put to be able to consider this material as an evidence or not. Do the makers agree on these kind of requirements or regulations? Are they part of the conversation or not? Are they influenced by such regulation, and who's verifying this material? So it's more kind of we're interested in the technical part of it, maybe, or what does it mean, you know, for those, how those images actually they're what's the journey of this image, regardless if it's going to be in court or not, if it's going to be an important evidence or not. So I think this is what a bit more interesting for us.
I'm going to follow up on the collaborative aspect of your work, but I was thinking I remembered Foucault's famous argument that an archive is a discursive system regulating what can and cannot be said in any historical period. And like thinking about that, and also thinking about your work on Syria, I was also like, in some way, we are living in a future created by such archives, like up till the moment of the reinterpretation. And hence, like interpreting or reinterpreting archives means also reinterpreting history. So how do you look at the concept of history in your work? And do you see any similarities between the work of an archival researcher and the historian?
I think specifically in real-time history, which is even in the title, I think we're also looking through it, thinking about history through the lens of media and how it plays out through media. And that was maybe one of the main interests in diving into that particular pool of material, because I think the speed of media makes it sometimes very difficult to understand how history is made. And I think that that was a very fascinating example, in fact, that even within the period of a couple of days, you go from seeing a news event being narrated in media, then political response within days, which is then absolutely verified by whatever news media it has been narrating it, a response, and then that is basically how history is narrated at that point, and it just stops there. And the kind of investigation and negating of that story, or the option for other stories to exist, is just, it doesn't even matter, because within the flow of how things go, it's sort of like it's sort of irrelevant in the grander scheme of things. So I think I think our relation to history is maybe to take time to go back and look at things again, and that's why we always focus on our core goals being looking at underrepresented stories, is the fact that even without any kind of bias or agenda towards what you are looking at, it is kind of interesting to relook at things again from different perspectives. So maybe it's a kind of a slowing down of history. I mean, that maybe doesn't make sense, but to kind of I mean, Foucault is also talking a lot about history and what constitutes history, and the kind of institutionalized histories, and what else there could possibly be. So yeah, it's a kind of very random actually selection that we make, you could say, because it's incomplete, it's very subjective, but it's still it is our way of really creating a little time capsule in a way, and re-looking at things. And it's been very valuable to work on projects such as Simba, the Last Prince of Bath Country, the publication that Ralia showed right in the beginning, because a lot of the fragments from there were extracted from social media in the time in 2011-12, when activism had a very different flavor in Syria. I mean, it still existed, and people were still very busy and active and doing things. And a lot of that doesn't exist anymore online, you know, all of those activities that were very much based on social media. So we were very happy to have, you know, clung on to some of the fragmented bits and pieces from that time to have something left over from that. So yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers maybe the question, but it somehow is a bit explaining the approach.
But is it really a random collection of things, or would you consider it a random collection of things for the purpose of building a non-random collection of things?
No, I don't think it's completely random. It's all within the same line of thinking, but it's not aiming to have a complete story or a completed collection, because and as annoying as it is, everything is ongoing. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's annoying because you sort of have nature. It's in our nature maybe to have things completed or rounded off, but these kind of investigations are maybe can be specified by the different approaches that we tend to take in each of them. And I'm really happy that we had the chance now in the last couple of years to really dive into what open source material really means, and the different types of disciplines that are actually connecting themselves to open source material, and how it's being used and interpreted in different means. And, you know, one of those, as we mentioned, is the eventual court of law, where that material can eventually find itself, which is no different to analog material that also might have the same purpose. But yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of maybe random is the wrong word, but it's just not proclaiming to have the completed story, but more dive into specific examples.
And thinking about access also, and the question of narrative, like when it comes to doing archival research in the context of, let's say, colonial or decolonial, or maybe archives of repressive regimes too, such as your work on Syria, how do you deal with absence? How do you deal with archival absence? Meaning like lack of access to certain documents or material, maybe destruction of certain archives, how do you deal with this? Maybe as someone described it as the problem of history without documents. When it comes to building this sort of collection, this archive of yours that you're going to work in on a collaborative basis, how do you deal with lack of certain information? Maybe there's a mismatch between the digital and the analog. So do you think at the whole picture, or how do you go about it exactly?
Well, I think there are many, like after 2010. So I think I can mark this day, like when the Arab Spring started. I think the way how activists, artists, even normal citizens start to understand the meaning or the power of what they're creating and the meaning of collecting. So I'm talking like, I will give you an example, like in case of Syria, you know, like when the revolution started, it was impossible to rely on official media to know what's happening. It was impossible to send official journalists to report on what's happening. So it was the activist role to report on what's really happening on the streets. So how do you, okay, one thing you start documenting, but how you distribute this information. So many activists start to share their content on social media, but also they start to store it on social media. So because not even knowing the complication of doing that, and the problem, like ownership, but also, you know, like the making it open to any interpretation. But in a way, it has no choice. They had no choice, because that was the only way where they can protect and preserve this material, because it's very difficult to hack social, like YouTube, or it's very difficult to hack Facebook. You know, it was kind of like you set up your priority differently. But also, I think since then there are many initiatives. You can notice the emerging of many initiatives who are focusing on archiving and documenting, which is in a way remarkable. But I think it's kind of this awareness that we are underrepresented. We don't trust our main media, or official media or government. We don't have access to existing archives, so we start to create our own documents. We start to narrate our own story. I think it's a reflection of awareness of the power of the narrative, actually. So it's not about the material itself. It's like how you narrate it, and how it's your way to tell your own story. And now, like you see in the Arab world, and if you just just go on a tour on social media, the amount of personal and like small initiative that start to archive and document many things when it comes to art, design, publications, really like personal initiative, without any funding, without any, it's become kind of a new practice, and it's really linked to this kind of like awakening and awareness about how important to do that. When this is how we deal with it. We are not going to wait until we have access. We create our own platforms, our own things, and it's really based on individual efforts. And hopefully, like in the future, there will. This is also like in the case of the Syrian Archive in Germany, of course. Because of the sensitivity of their practice and what they're doing and the importance of the practice, they're able to collect funding and to get the support they needed. But in a way, it's a kind of personal initiative. It's not linked to any governments or any kind of like an official institution. So I think the lack of institutions to open their archive led to these kind of amazing initiative, which I think is a really good sign, especially in our region.
Also going back to collaborative work and collaboration, you said in your talk that we always try to involve other people in what we're doing. And so how important, in your opinion, is collective work and collaborative work when it comes to making visible or reinterpreting archives? And how do you look at issues of, let's say, subjectivity and objectivity when it comes to reinterpretation? And I'm also plugging in a question from Rana Beiruti. She said, I would like to hear more about some of the challenges or nuances that appear when it comes to staying objective when piecing together fragments of archives. What role does their personal subjectivity play in how the resulting narrative takes shape?
Yeah, I think in different projects we've maybe dealt with that slightly differently. So maybe just first to have a look at Rana's question, and maybe to mention how we worked on the New World. So of course, I spending quite some time in the archive in Washington, DC, we realized and we learned a lot about how it, what does it mean to be working with documents like Foucault, a series of documents which don't really have, I mean, even if all the documents are there and the box is complete, but there is no narration to go with those documents, it's also very difficult to actually understand in which order they come in and what type of correct narration, and then who writes the narration. So we were very much also keeping it in mind that Alexander, who was the author of that archive, was totally in control of how that archive was recorded, and also how all the metadata was kept. So we were working with that material, and we decided at some point, and that's very clear actually, I think, as you see in the video, is to literally to use that original material or the original document in the construction of the video story itself, but then to combine that with all kinds of different fragments, like the reinterpretation of the song material, and to very broadly tell the story of, you know, one migration story, which in many ways represents a lot of people's story. I mean, it's not as if we were trying to be very 100% truthful to that particular person or to that particular story. But yeah, I mean, the act of piecing together all of those documents is in itself a very subjective idea. And then during the process of doing that and finalizing it, it was really quite interesting to speak to the daughter of the couple, Amr and Adla, who is based in Detroit, to have her on the phone and to say, like, okay, we think that this and this happened. They traveled from Cairo or Alexandria, they got the boat, and they landed here, and then this is what we interpreted from the archive. And in fact, for her as the daughter of the couple to confirm that, like, yeah, actually, this is kind of, that did happen. But then, you know, there was a slight twist in the story. So in that way, we try to involve as many people along the way to contribute to a story. But I think for us, what is the most important is to embrace the subjectivity of it, and to really to incorporate different voices, because we are telling a universal story here. It doesn't really matter that it's Amr and Adla Kadash. It can be like, it can be anybody. And it's an important story from a particular moment in history that we think needs to have light shed on that, because it's different to how migrants are perceived now in the USA. And it's important to remember how that was. And to just generally expose stories from that archive, because it is rather difficult to access. So I think the question of subjectivity, I think, is important to keep in mind. And it's important to keep our parameters clear and explicit. Like this is how what we approach it as, this is who we are, and this is not the truth, but it's an interpretation of the truth, and that is definitely no secret. So yeah, I mean, people could find that problematic, or it could be in contrast to how a traditional documentary maker should work, in terms of, like, you know, having the camera lens as just projecting the truth only. But it's a choice, I think, and it's also a choice that we embrace. Yeah.
Thank you. And also keeping collaboration in mind, And also what Wغالية mentioned about distribution. One of your research interests concerns the role images play in conflicts too. So under today's economy of attention, and we're always bombarded by images everywhere, from all around us, even the images we produce ourselves. So in your opinion, what is the importance of curation, like as artists, thinking of yourselves as artists, what is the importance of curation when it comes to displaying and exhibiting such work?
Yeah, that's a good one. You mean artistic curation, or what? Yeah.
Yeah, like what extent can the role of curation fulfill the purpose of exhibiting or displaying reinterpreted archival work? And what kind of relationship can be developed as a result of this curation, keeping in mind the collaborative nature of your work too?
Yeah. Well, we participated in 2017 in a really interesting exhibition and actually that's where we showed the New World for the first time. We were connected with collective practices, so people who operate as collectives, mostly from the Global South. That was at the Centre Pompidou, and it was called Cosmopolis. Almost forgot. Yeah, and that was interesting because the curation of that was actually not thematic, which is obviously usually the case. You know, the curator sets the curatorial theme and then selects artists based on that. So that was really nice for us because, yeah, I think there's a special quality to being able to collaborate as an artist because there's a certain foregoing of ego, I think, as well, especially if you do not operate under your own name, that you operate under a kind of a name or, yeah, you're sort of anonymous as an individual. So there's a special quality to that I think we also really connected to in our colleagues from Indonesia and from Pakistan, especially female collectives. And so I think curation in that kind of context I can see is really powerful, you know, because it's it's almost a political agenda that you bring to the table and a motivation to bring people together. But yeah, of course, I think the general answer to that would be, yes, curation is important to give a framework with which the audience can access the work or understand the work. And I think especially with real-time history, we often face some confusions around how the work should be perceived. I mean, you didn't see the video extract now, but it could be perceived, for example, as something like infographics on the news or some kind of news telling or truth telling. And if it is not properly curated, there could be that space for the misunderstanding of what the work's intention is. So I think it is really important, but I think we've also been quite lucky to also show at film festivals and other contexts where it is not so much within only an artistic bubble. But yeah, I think it has been important for us to embrace also new audiences within media art, within, you know, traditional contemporary art, film, yeah, different types of audiences.
And maybe I think we have time for like one or two more questions, and I would also like to remind the audience, or maybe some of the participants of our summer academy, if they would like to send in a question. And while we wait on that, I was thinking, like, as Foundland Collective, your work, you work across multiple disciplines. From research and design and publishing. So how do you deal with the issue of like transfer and application of knowledge from one domain to another? Do you look at it the same way, or like in the sense that like if you're doing a publishing, for me, that I could consider that somehow an archive, like you're producing an archive temporarily, let's say, or it will stay on. So how do you like deal with the issue of transfer of knowledge, considering your backgrounds and considering your interests, working in on designing a publication? Do you carry the same challenges and restrictions and even interest when it comes to applying that archival work in, like, let's say, a video, or doing maybe an installation work at an exhibition gallery?
Just to be honest about this question, like when we start working on a project, usually we don't have an idea about how this will evolve eventually. Like, and this is something also we face a lot when it comes to funding, like when you apply for funding, like you have an idea about a project, or you want to investigate, or you want to go research a specific archive, and then you're required to answer so many questions about the work that you're going to produce, which is sometimes very difficult to predict. And we do, as a collective, always kind of try, we do push ourselves to try different media. This is what we tried doing in earlier years, because I don't know if we mentioned, but we both started as, we studied graphic design, and our masters, and during our master, we started to explore different media related to design, not only, like the traditional design that we know now, or even back then. And stepping into other media was kind of an experimentation from our side. Like, okay, how can we how can we tell the story in a video format? And to be honest, like we were surprised when our video, for example, for the New World, was selected for the Rotterdam film festival, because it was not made to be screened on big screen, for example. And we always, and I think this is, I consider something like the beauty of of our journey, that sometimes you you discover like new things, and you discover new media, and you approach it in a different way. Like it's really interesting to see us, like recently we were a panelist in a conference where we discussed together with documentary makers, really like traditional documentary makers, how to deal with such material like in real-time history, or how to deal with post-truth, and in a way, like being together in a conversation and seeing it from our perspective and our own experience with what images mean and how we can deal with image. And also the positioning ourselves also like is different, because traditional documentary maker, they still operate in a specific, under specific regulation and rules that we kind of, we didn't have, because we were not trained as documentary makers. So we had more room to experiment. So we kind of like give ourselves like room to see how the research take us, because in a way it was unpredictable. Like, as I said, when we went to DC, when we wanted to see the archive, we didn't know what are we going to see, and nobody also could tell us, because this collection was barely touched, like, so it's all kind of a surprise, and we need to find our way. So it's always work in progress. And the thing is, like, me and Lauren, we developed this kind of like methods that we discuss a lot, and like through conversations and reflecting all the time, and trying to remember what we want to say, and how we usually do it. It's kind of like lead us to kind of a decision, what kind of format, what kind of platform, and in which context. And sometimes it's easier when you do commissioned work, like, for example, if you get commissioned to produce a piece for a specific exhibition or under a specific theme. But also, like, when you initiate a project and you work with it, so you have more freedom to experiment with different formats.
So would you say that there's like an extra pressure on artists and researchers who work with digital archives, in the sense that technology like evolves so quickly, and with that comes, the burden or the pressure of like adopting to new practices and technologies while they're like being content with what you're doing. Sometimes you have to jump from one thing to another when it comes to funding, but also when it comes to like the development of technology, it also comes the threat of like forgery, deep fakes, and all that. You mentioned this already. So how do you deal with the issue of authenticity when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think it's something that is important to consider. I think, yeah, there is always the possibility for material to be faked, but that doesn't, it doesn't mean that image manipulation necessarily needs to be involved, that it could also be just in the way, as we have shown in our examples, the way that the story is narrated using text and image can also be as manipulative. But I do think one of the important things to be conscious of is the way that information bubbles are created and kind of echo chambers are formed, and how algorithms, of course, define what we see, what we don't see, which I think is even more reason to focus on these kinds of issues, because we are living in a world which is becoming increasingly divided at every moment. So yeah, I think, yes, it becomes more difficult to follow because everything is happening at a very high speed. But I think that doesn't really, that should not really be a deterrent to trying to understand and grapple with things. And of course, there is a kind of a threshold because we don't know actually how those algorithms function, and we cannot really see it. So it all becomes so much the more opaque for us to actually understand. So yeah, I really think that both Wagalia and I are teaching, and I think in our way of teaching and our approach, and also in the things that we advocate for, it is really for media literacy, like a closer reading and a critical reading of all news that we see around us, and being able to, yeah, have the tools to just think about that for a bit longer and not really accept things as they may appear is really something valuable that I think we all should try and practice, even though, yeah, it is overwhelming in the information speed. But yeah, I think it is nonetheless, it doesn't, I think it's still an important practice to focus on specific cases, to even dive, more reason to dive back into history, perhaps.
Thank you, Lauren. I think we're running out of time, and I don't see any questions so far from the audience, but maybe we can end here. I would like to thank you, really thank you again for like joining us and for this very informative talk and conversation too. And I really wish I was in Amman to join the Summer Academy students in your workshop too. So best of luck in that, and hope to see you again soon. And thank you everybody for joining us, and see you again in our next talk.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.